Conflict management is a very useful skill to have. And let's face it, at some point in your life, you're definitely going to be having a disagreement with somebody. So having these skills to be able to resolve the conflict is extremely useful. In some cases, we may be dealing with certain individuals who I would say are difficult, and they're generally not willing to listen, maybe even toxic. And for these kind of people, we may need a more specific strategy in how we want to approach them. In some cases, the difficult or toxic person may be someone you're forced to work with, for example, your boss. And in this situation, I know of some people who have found success and happiness by leaving that job. So that's definitely an option if you cannot work around this person. In any case, we're going to discuss some useful practices which we can apply in our day-to-day lives to ease conflict management and to ease conflict resolution and hopefully get a better outcome. The first thing we're going to talk about is the trauma-informed care approach, or the TIC method for short. It's a clinical term more used in mental health, and it's very important as it helps us frame and understand the person that we're talking to. In the layman's term, the TIC method is kind of having a bit more empathy and trying to see where that person's coming from, why they behave in a certain way. And we can do this by trying to understand a bit more about their background and their history, any past traumas that they might have experienced. By doing so, we are better able to understand why people think in a certain way and how to potentially influence them or get them to listen to us. This also potentially allows us to avoid future conflicts with that person simply because we understand what may or may not trigger that person, and we would avoid doing things or saying things that would create conflict with these people. It's not very difficult to apply the TIC method, and it really helps us strategize how we will deal with people on an individual basis. Now, I'm going to give you an example of how I use the TIC method to understand how a person thinks. So I know a guy who's about 47 years old. He's got 2 kids and a beautiful wife. His career could be better, but what I've noticed about this guy is that he tends to talk down to his younger siblings and also to his younger cousins. To a certain extent, you could kind of call it bullying as well, because the objective of the way that he speaks and the things that he says is to put the other person down, or as a show of authority or power or superiority. Now, what people don't really know behind the scenes is that I know that this person's mother is quite the narcissist and in a way a bully herself. So this dude, who's now 47, had always been raised by a bully mother who probably bullied him as a child unknowingly because they simply never had that self-awareness training, which resulted in this generational trauma being passed down. And what I noticed is this guy also tends to guilt trip his kids to get certain things in certain situations, which you can imagine can be quite uncomfortable. And what's not surprising is that this guy's mother is also the type to guilt trip her kids. So you can see the pattern that's been passed down. So now that I am more trauma informed about these people, I can position myself better when dealing with them. So for example, I know that they have anger issues. So if these people for whatever reason come at me, guns blazing, and they're in attack mode, I can tell myself, hey, don't get triggered, don't get angry, just take a deep breath. You know that they had a hard childhood, a hard upbringing, so let's just stay calm and respond calmly, as opposed to reacting to their anger, and we become angry and there's no conflict resolution at all. So let's get into the method or the technique that we can use to help us resolve conflicts. Now this is called the XYZ method, which you may have heard of. What we're going to do is say, when you said X, I feel Y, and I would have preferred if you said Z instead. So for example, let's say a boss said some nasty things in a meeting room and you wanted to confront the person or have a conversation with that boss. So when you found a time to speak to him or her, you would say, Hey boss, when you said that our presentation was stupid, it really demotivated us. I would really appreciate, or we would really appreciate, if you instead said, thank you team, I appreciate the hard work and the effort. I do believe certain areas of this presentation can be improved. One thing to note is that the tonality that you come in makes a big impact to how the other person might respond, especially if they're quite a disagreeable person. But the objective here is to make sure that the other person knows how they have made you feel. Maybe they don't realize it sometimes that, oh, I actually didn't mean to. I'm sorry I said that. Maybe I should address this with the team. Another example on a more personal level may be like, hey, I noticed that every time I try to tell you about my situation, I notice that you kind of dodge it and give unsolicited advice or just try to make jokes about it. I would prefer if you just listen to me. That's all I really want. So what we're trying to achieve in this situation is to be able to relay our feelings or how we felt about certain something without triggering the defensiveness in somebody. So tonality is very, very important. How we approach and when we approach that person is very important as well. You don't want to go in and ask something like this when that person is not in a calm mood or is kind of angry or distracted. So try to find some space when this person is in the right state of mind, in the right frame of mind, so they're more able to listen and hopefully not have a bad reaction. So if I were to summarize and recap things, just remember when you're trying to resolve a conflict with somebody, number one, take the trauma-informed care approach, which then allows you to be a bit more objective and calm because you understand why a person is behaving in a certain way. And then number two, use the XYZ method, which is again, when you said or when you did X, I felt Y. I'd prefer and I'd appreciate if you did Z instead. And number three, be aware of your tonality. You can practice your tonality by recording yourself on your phone and in front of a mirror as a simulation. And this can really influence the outcome of that conversation, because if you are also aggressive, the other person will start to get defensive. So try as much as you can to stay calm and composed throughout the conversation. Now, this method does not guarantee you will achieve the desired outcome every time, but it's a great start in resolving your problem or your conflict with somebody. For some people, the feedback might take a little time to process, so if that person becomes defensive, just stay cool and hopefully the message gets through to them in a couple of days. What's important as well is then you've gotten it off your chest, so that's on the other person's plate right now. Now, this method is best used in a face-to-face situation, and I don't recommend you do it via text. You can, but I've had a situation where the person misunderstood the tonality that I was using and ended up being a bit more aggressive or defensive. So the other option would be a voice note, but then again, it's also a bit less personal. So the best thing to do is always take the face-to-face approach, difficult as it may be. So I hope you find this information to be useful. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.